Now, I've been building apps with FlutterFlow for more than a year now, but only the die-hard subscribers know that this channel was actually started with Bubble.io tutorials. More than 3 years ago, Bubble was my foray into the exciting world of no-code, and things have changed a lot since then. And so I figured that it would be kind of fun and interesting to log back into Bubble and take a look at the tool from a perspective of someone who has been using FlutterFlow for quite some time. And so this video is going to be divided into two parts. In the first part, we're going to log into Bubble. I'm going to show you some of my old apps, and we're going to take a look at some of the functionality that Bubble provides from the perspective of someone who has been using FlutterFlow and someone who is experienced with no-code tools. And in the second part of the video, we're going to take a look at a major change that Bubble had recently implemented that forced lots of users to flee Bubble for other no-code platforms. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I'm going to be showing to you in today's video, you can get more information from my Patreon page, and you can learn more about our amazing Patreon community using the link below the video. And so the first thing that I want to do is I want to log back into my old Bubble account, and I want to take a look at Bubble and talk about 5 different categories. The first is going to be UI. The second is going to be logic or actions. The third is going to be database or storage. The fourth is going to be extensibility or plugins. And last but not least, we're going to talk about pricing and deployment. All right, so here I am logged into Bubble, and as you can see, I have quite a few apps here. And as you can see, I worked on these apps some time ago and actually used to have more apps, but then I deleted some to make room for new ones, etc., etc. So I did spend lots and lots of time with this platform. And so it's rather interesting for me to kind of log back in and to take a look at all the functionality, at all the offerings from a perspective of someone who has been using FlutterFlow, but also who is someone with lots of experience when it comes to no-code tools. And so let's go ahead and open one of these apps here, and let's first analyze the UI. Okay, let's take a look at the UI because that is where everything starts. Now, before we talk about what I have here on the screen, let's take a look at different UI elements that Bubble provides and kind of helps you to build out your app. So we have the design panel here, but here we have the workflow, which is the logic layer, the actions. We have data, which is the storage or the backend layer. Here we have styles, which is a way to style the app, plugins, to make your app more extensible, to create some custom functionality, settings, and logs. Now, we're going to be covering a lot of these things a little bit later in the video, but first I want to talk about the design, because after all, that is what the users see first. Now, the first thing that I want to say is that when you log into Bubble and you start to design your app, the experience that I personally have is that I'm building like a website, or I'm building a web app. Okay, so Bubble is not mobile first, right? You're not building a mobile app right away, you know, as with FlutterFlow, right? When you log into FlutterFlow, you are kind of on a mobile screen in the beginning, and so it has this mobile first behavior. And really, a lot of people, they use FlutterFlow for mobile apps, right? That's kind of the main advantage of FlutterFlow is that you build an app and it's going to work on Android, iOS. It becomes essentially like a native app, right? Because it compiles into a native form. Whereas with Bubble, you're logged in and you're looking at a screen, kind of looks like a web app. And of course, I mean, you can make it responsive. So, you know, it's going to display perfectly on a mobile device, etc., etc. But that right there is the first difference, okay? With FlutterFlow, if you're looking to do mobile apps, you're looking to do apps for, you know, phones, tablets first. Right, you know, you want to build an app, you know, like Airbnb or something, right? It's going to be a mobile app, and then later on you might have a web app, right? You're looking for mobile first experience. Obviously, FlutterFlow delivers that, you know, right off the bat. You see that immediately, okay? Whereas with Bubble, you kind of have this web app web app interface. You're building a web app, you're building, some kind of like a regular website type app. That's the experience you're getting. Now, if I go in here, I can see all my elements. Okay, so this is very, very similar with FlutterFlow's kind of this element tree. Okay, and I can click here. And I have this repeating group. Okay, now this repeating group is like a list view, right? Because I can double click and I can load it up with data, right? So I can specify the type of content. I have the search of products. And of course, I need to specify the products. I need to make sure they're in the database, that I have all that. And so the experience that I have here is that it's less of kind of this widget experience that I have with FlutterFlow. With FlutterFlow, everything is a widget, right? I think in terms of widgets, where here I'm thinking in terms of like elements, just different elements. You also have like a map element, various elements. So very, very similar to FlutterFlow. Now, at this point, what we're looking at is a website, okay? And that is because we haven't really talked about the data, the logic, and all of these elements. And that is why right now, let's talk about the logic side of things, right? Because the logic infrastructure is what actually takes what you build and makes it into an app, okay? Because without the logic, all you have is a website. So if you click on this workflow tab, here you can define events, okay? And so what that means is that when something happens, do this, okay? So as you can see, it says here when, and here we have a condition. And so if I click on this, I see this bottom panel where I can specify conditions, okay? So we have step 1, go to page search, and then I can add another action. I can add more action here. And same thing here, when text current sales product is clicked, go to page category, okay? Here's another one, when text current sales product is clicked, go to page product detail, okay? So that's what I was talking about. This is going to go to product detail. FlutterFlow has something like this as well, obviously, and all no-code tools would have this as well. But the main thing about the way Bubble did it is it's very, very user-friendly, right? It's just very, very easy. Now, as compared to FlutterFlow, FlutterFlow has more technical terminology, okay? So it also has this logic, it has actions and action flows and all of that. But the way that they've designed it is just more technical. And so for beginners, someone who has never, built apps before, doesn't know what code is, doesn't know anything, I feel that, they're going to look at this and this is going to make more sense to them because this is just so user-friendly. I mean, FlutterFlow is also very, very user-friendly, but I think this is extremely user-friendly, right? So all I need to do is, I can click on this workflow and I can add more actions. I can just click here and here I have various things that I can do. Action, is this going to be an action type thing? Is this going to be navigation, data? And so, obviously FlutterFlow has the same thing. When you go into actions, you first have to pick what kind of action. You have different categories, just like you have here. And then you can pick exactly what's happening, right? So if you want to do navigation, I can say go to page, and here you can specify destination. This is data to send. So these are essentially parameters when it comes to FlutterFlow terminology, right? Here is just data to send. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. A parameter is nothing more than, data that you're sending. Whereas here is just, they didn't name it a parameter. They named it data to send, which is just, more beginner friendly, right? So a lot of these things you're going to be seeing, especially when it comes to kind of logic and data and a lot of these programming things, they're going to be a lot more just beginner friendly in Bubble, okay? Now, I have all of these workflows, but how did I create these workflows? Well, you can click here and you can first create an event. So remember, with these workflows, the way they work is that if something happens, if there's an event, do this. And so we have these events. So we have the do this part, and here you can define another event. The other thing that I can do is I can go back to the UI. Let's say I want to, double click on something here. And here I can edit my workflow. So when I edit this workflow, it comes back to the screen and it highlights the action that I'm working with. Okay, so you can start, your workflow from here, or you can start it from there. So this is really nice. It's very, very user-friendly. You can do a lot of these things, right? You can do email, payment, stuff like that. I believe FlutterFlow has more things, but you can extend it with plugins. Okay, so if you've built a plugin, and that plugin exposes an action, okay, you're going to be seeing these actions here. They have a very, very big plugin ecosystem. So chances are, if you need something to be done that this system, Bubble by default, does not provide, you can find a plugin to do that. And we're going to be covering that in just a second when we talk about plugins. And so you have element actions, you have payment, you have custom events that you can schedule an API workflow. You can do a lot of interesting things. And typically they provide everything that you need in order to do the logic that you want, whether it is, you know, interfacing with UI elements or working with some external systems like payments or emails or stuff like that. And so all of this is very, very easy to work with. It's all self-explanatory. It's relatively easy to get started for someone without any prior experience. Now, let's talk about the data in the backend, which is arguably one of my favorite parts when it comes to Bubble. So if you click on data, you can define different data types and you can actually create data for them, right? So Bubble, unlike many no-code tools, actually comes with its own built-in data backend. So FlutterFlow does not have a built-in data backend. You basically have to use something like Firestore or Supabase or something else. And a lot of other no-code tools that I looked at, they do not have their own data backend, okay? But Bubble does have a data backend. So for instance, here I can search for a data type, or I can create a new one. I can just say create, and then I can define different fields. So I can add a field, let's say name, and I can say this is text. And I can also make that name into an array if it's not a single element, if it's going to hold multiple values as well. And then I can click on app data. I can click on select all cars, and here I can just add a new entry. Okay, so let's say I have a new car. Let's say it's a BMW, slug BMW, created. It creates it. And now I just see the value right here. And so this is really, really nice. And one of the biggest benefits of having this data right here is that it's a lot faster to build an app, right? There's less friction, okay? With FlutterFlow and other systems, I have to configure my Firebase. I have to do a bunch of things. I have to go through the motions and through all of these steps, A to Z, etc., and configure my Firebase. Whereas here, I can just do it myself. Now, if you've done, you know, the Firebase things before, you've configured Firebase projects, you know, all you have to do is do it once, because after that it's going to be relatively easy, then that's fine. But here it's just a lot easier to get started because it's a very, very powerful data backend, right? You have privacy, you have security settings, option sets. You also have a file manager as well, which is really, really nice. And the other thing about this is not a bare bones data manager just to get you started. It's relatively well done, right? It's relatively comprehensive. You can model, you know, the kind of data that you need really, really easily here. And so I really, really like this part. You know, it's definitely not a deal breaker when it comes to using other tools that do not provide this, because you know, all you need to do is do it once, and then it's just automatic, like how it is with me and probably many of you as well. But this is really nice. The next thing I want to talk about is styles, right? So this is arguably an area I don't really spend much time in because I usually focus on building apps. I don't really focus on styling elements here. But from what I've seen, you can pretty much style your app in any way that you want. And this is the same with FlutterFlow. FlutterFlow uses Flutter under the hood to style it, whereas Bubble has their own kind of proprietary ways of styling, right? So you can style a variable, you have different element style. And so regardless what kind of app that you're going to be building, chances are you'll be able to style it to your liking with Bubble and with FlutterFlow as well. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is plugins. And this is a big one because if you're going to be building an app that is going to be doing something specific, it's not going to be a run-of-the-mill app, just like a lot of other apps out there, but it's going to be doing something interesting. Maybe it's going to be processing payments, or, you know, you have a, you know, a data backend that you need to connect to that is not provided by, you know, Bubble out of the box. Chances are you'll have to do it with plugins. And so right now I have two plugins here. I have a Stripe plugin, and I have an API connector. So unlike many other no-code tools, Bubble does not do API stuff out of the box. One of the first things that you need to do is you need to install this API connector. And this is the opposite with FlutterFlow and many other tools, because they provide API functionality out of the box. And so once you install this, you can essentially add your API. So I can expand this API that I have here, or I can add another API, okay? And then I can configure it here, and then I can do an initialize call, which is very, very similar to FlutterFlow when you're testing your APIs, because with FlutterFlow, you can test an API and you can actually save the values so that you can easily reference them later. But with Bubble, you have to initialize call, because otherwise Bubble is not going to know what your data looks like. Now, one nice thing about Bubble is that when you click on initialize call, Bubble will actually parse the data and it will understand what your data is made out of. Whereas with FlutterFlow, you still have to find the data yourself. Even if you label it, I mean, it's nice, but it's still a little bit tricky to kind of find the data. Whereas with Bubble, once you initialize call, that data from your API, it becomes almost like data that came with Bubble. It's very, very tight integration. Again, that's another thing that Bubble really excels at, is that it just makes everything a lot easier. Everything is just tighter. So regardless whether you're getting your data from data storage from here, or you're getting it from an API, it's going to behave the exact same way. Whereas with FlutterFlow, if you're getting your data from Firebase, then, you know, it's going to be just a built-in query. Or if you're getting your data from an API, then you need to worry about JSON paths and things like that. Essentially, the experience of working with data will depend on where exactly you're getting your data from. So if you're getting your data from Firebase, you're going to have a certain type of experience, right? You're going to have, you know, your queries, your limits, your, you know, all of these things. But if you're getting it from an API, you're going to have a different experience, right? You're not going to have, you know, those features anymore. And now you have to worry about JSON paths. Okay. So you have a slightly different experience. And now if you're doing Supabase, it's going to be a completely different experience, because now you have to think about how you're querying, how you're updating the data. It's going to be a slightly different experience, because Supabase is different than Firebase. Whereas with Bubble, you know, if you're getting your data from, you know, internally, and you're getting your data from an API, it's going to behave almost the exact same way. So this is really, really nice. And really, that's how it should be, because at the end of the day, regardless whether you're getting that data, whether it's, you know, from a database or an API, the way that you work with that data should be all the same. It should be consistent across different data sources, and Bubble gets it for the most part right. Whereas with FlutterFlow, it's a little bit different, but, you know, it's not a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker, because when you know where you're going to be getting that data from, you will know exactly how, you know, how to handle that data. So it's definitely not a deal breaker. And with Bubble, it's just tighter integration. Now, remember what I said, that, you know, if you want to use like Firebase, you want to use some other, you know, adapter, you need to have a plugin, right? So if you click on this plugins tab and you add a plugin, you have to search for something. So if I type Firebase, you know, I'm going to have plugins, right? Firebase authentication, Firebase storage, a bunch of other plugins that I can use. And I have to figure out, okay, you know, which is the right plugins. Is this a popular plugin? Is this not? Can I type Supabase? And we have Supabase Vector here as well. So we have a Supabase Vector, 33 apps, not a lot. Supabase JS. Okay, so this is a paid plugin. Okay, so I'll have to pay extra for this plugin. Or should I build my own plugin? Whereas FlutterFlow has that, you know, out of the box, right? That has Supabase support built in, okay? And so that is the flip side of being easy to use, right? With Bubble, I come in and it's very, very easy. Everything is intuitive. But anytime that I need to go beyond that, okay, I want to use Firebase or I want to use Supabase, I need a plugin. I need to start, trying to figure out there's more complexity beyond my built-in option. But that is where FlutterFlow starts to have an advantage, okay? Because when you're using Firebase and Firestore is a great backend, right? You're gonna, you can't go wrong by using Firestore. It's very, very easy. Firestore is built in, Supabase is built in. A lot of these things are built in, so you don't need to go hunt for plugins and stuff like that. Whereas here, it's a different experience. Okay, now I need to go, should I build my own plugin? Should I buy a plugin? All of these things. Now, when it comes to actually extending your app by building your own custom plugins, I actually built a plugin for Bubble here. I have a video on this channel, and I also built many plugins, custom widgets, custom actions, custom functions in FlutterFlow. And so I will take the FlutterFlow's approach any day of the week. For me, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a lot easier. It's a lot more straightforward. And the other thing about it is that you have access to a big Flutter community, right? You can head over to pub.dev. You have access to lots and lots of plugins, whereas with Bubble, it's a proprietary system. You have to learn it, and it's only going to work with Bubble. And so I built some plugins here with Bubble here, and I really did not like the experience. Okay, it wasn't a very pleasant experience, and I really like the FlutterFlow approach a lot better. And so while I like the fact that it's easy, the design is easy, the workflow is easy, built-in data and all of that, and so when it comes to advanced functionality, building out custom features, extending my app, I would pick FlutterFlow any day of the week. It's just a lot easier. It's a lot more pleasant for me compared to Bubble, which is a lot more proprietary. Their entire platform is proprietary, and building plugins, extending this proprietary platform is very proprietary, if that makes sense. And so when it comes to starting out, it's all very simple. It's all very intuitive. But as you're adding more features, as you're adding more complexity and more functionality, you're starting to kind of feel a little limited. And personally, I would rather extend my app. I would rather work with FlutterFlow to build a very complicated, complex app, very sophisticated app, as opposed to me having to do it in Bubble and try to build plugins using their proprietary system. For me, it's just it's definitely an approach that I would not want to take. Now, once you've built your app, you need to deploy it. You need to make it available to users, and this is the area where FlutterFlow and Bubble are very different. So if you take a look at this app right here, I have this upgrade to deploy, and I also have this preview here. So I can click on preview, and I can actually preview my app. I can take a look and see how it looks. And so here I am previewing my app, and as you can see, it actually loaded live data here, so some widgets here, and I can also debug my app. There's normal, slow, step by step, and I can also inspect elements. Okay, so I can inspect this element, and I can take a look what's happening with this element. If it's not doing what I wanted to do, I can take a look at some of the properties and try to figure out what exactly is happening. And that's very useful. Now, if I go back to the app, let's say I want to deploy this app. I want to make it live. I have a custom domain. I want to launch this app to my users. Maybe I have some users waiting for the launch. I got their emails, and I created an email list, and I'm ready to send them the URL to the app so that they can take a look and they can see if they like the app or not. Well, if I click here, it's telling me that I need to upgrade to access this feature. And right now I'm on a free plan. And in order for me to launch this app, to deploy it, I need to upgrade to one of these three plans here. So I can go to the starter plan, the growth, and the team plan. Okay. Now it's the exact same thing when it comes to FlutterFlow. If you want to deploy your app, you want to deploy it on mobile devices, you want to make it available, you have to upgrade to a paid plan. Now, the biggest difference when it comes to deploying your app on Bubble and deploying your app on FlutterFlow is that with FlutterFlow, you can simply generate the code, and you can take that code anywhere you want, because at the end of the day, FlutterFlow is nothing more than a Flutter code generator. It's a very sophisticated generator, but all it really is doing is generating Flutter code. If I decide that, I built my app with FlutterFlow, and, I want to take this code, I want to take this final code, and I want to, launch the apps, and I want to do something, I want to customize it, I can easily do that, because all I need to do is download the code, and now I can do whatever I want. Whereas with Bubble, it's not so simple, okay? With Bubble, there's no such thing as code, because even when you deploy the app, you have to keep paying them, okay? So you can't take this code and then do whatever you want with this code, launch it on your own server, do something else. You're still locked into Bubble for as long as you're going to be running this app. And so if you launch your app and it's running month after month, maybe year after year, and it's making some money here and there, rest assured you're going to be paying Bubble as well for that service, because you can't just take your app and take it with you, because this is a proprietary platform. And in fact, when we talk about deployment and we talk about running your app on Bubble, Bubble actually made major pricing changes earlier this year that had a lot of people scrambling for different no-code providers. In fact, I've been noticing a lot of people moving from Bubble to FlutterFlow. So here's the blog article announcing the price changes. And it says here, upcoming changes to Bubble's pricing plans in 2023. And so essentially what they decided to do is that they decided to charge customers based on how active their apps are. So, before it was like a flat rate or something similar to a flat rate, whereas now with these changes, they're introducing something called a WU, which is a work unit. So the more active your app is, the more resources your app is using on the platform, right? So if your app is doing a lot of things, you're going to be paying more. Later on, they also updated their pricing. And so this is their pricing plans. And as you can see, there's a field here called a WU. So in the free plan, you get 50,000 work units. For the starter plan, you get 175,000 work units, 250,000, and on and on. And if we go back to my app, if you go into settings, you can see that I'm on the free plan and I have 50,000 work units available, and I've only used a half a work unit, and this app is not doing anything. Okay, so I have no idea what a work unit is, and probably a lot of people don't. And so when your app starts to run, you can judge how active it is and how many work units it is using, and then you can decide for yourself. And so if your app is running and it's using more than 50,000 work units, then you need to hop over to this plan here. And so you need to decide, my app is using 60,000 work units. What does that even mean, right? Is it serving X users? Is it serving, X customers? Is it making, Y dollars? And here's actually an interesting article that I found, and the title is Adapting to Bubble's New Pricing, Utilizing AWS, HookDeck, and TinyBird to Reduce Your WU Usage. And so in a nutshell, what the person is talking about in this article are different ways of offloading the logic, the calculation that used to happen inside of their Bubble app to other third-party services. And they mentioned Amazon API Gateway and a bunch of other services, because according to them, it's a lot cheaper to use these third-party services than to do the same thing inside of Bubble and pay for those work units. So a really well written and interesting article, but it definitely adds a lot more complexity to your no-code app project, because now you have to think about, okay, will I be able to afford, paying for this plan with all my work units, or do I need to introduce other third-party services that are going to be doing the actual logic and the grunt work, so that I do not pay a lot of money to Bubble and instead pay, a lower service fee to these third-party services. So while this approach can be cheaper in the long run, it definitely adds some layers of complexity to your app. And obviously, this is not something you ever need to concern yourself if you're working with FlutterFlow, because with FlutterFlow, once you design the app, once you've built the app, you can simply download the code and then launch the app. And so you don't need to host it. You don't need to pay for work units. You don't need to think about, whether your app is going to be active or not active. You can simply download the code, build the app, launch it into various app stores, Google Play Store, Apple's App Store, or what have you. And if you're building a web app, you can host it very, very cheaply on just about any cloud provider. And that's a benefit of using Flutter for building your web app. So regardless of what kind of an app you're building, whether it's a desktop app, a web app, an Android app, an iOS app, the development process is completely different. Whereas with Bubble, you're on a proprietary platform where you need to pay if you need to deploy the app and if your app is active, and you will be paying in relation to how active your app is. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, this is one of the biggest advantages of FlutterFlow, is that the code is always yours. You can take it anytime that you want, and you can do anything that you want with it. It's a very, very satisfying feeling knowing that once you've designed and built the app, you can always download the code and do whatever you want with it. Now, when you think about the no-code arena, you have Bubble and FlutterFlow, which are two of the bigger no-code app builders out there. Obviously, there are tons of other no-code builders that do various things, but when I think about no-code, I think about Bubble, I think about FlutterFlow. And when you think about them as no-code tools, they share a lot of similarities. They allow you to build awesome apps. They allow you to have, actions that do pretty much anything that you want. They allow you to connect it with data fairly easily. But when you dig deeper, you will see that Bubble and FlutterFlow are very, very different. They're different in their philosophy. They're different in what kind of apps they aim to help you build. And ultimately, they're very, very different when it comes to actually deploying and running and maintaining your app. So obviously, going forward, I feel that FlutterFlow is a better option for more people, unless you need to use Bubble for some specific reasons. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video and you're looking to step up and better up your no-code knowledge, there's simply no better way to get started than by studying and looking at how existing apps are built rather than building an app from absolute scratch. And so when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to pretty much all the apps that are built on this channel, where you can easily view and or clone them to see how they're built, to see what they're doing. And beyond that, you're also going to get access to other content such as Q&As, live streams, behind the scenes content, and my exclusive masterclass series where I do a deep dive on a specific topic that the community votes on. Plus, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to be supporting this channel and supporting my work, and that is highly, highly appreciated. So if any of that sounds like something you might be interested in, you can learn more about our amazing community using the link in the description below. So definitely check it out and consider becoming a member.